Hey, econ students, this is part 5 of learning economics during a period of epidemic isolation. And this is our second video that deals a little bit with personal finance and T-charts. The big goal in this lesson is to teach you all how to become a millionaire. No, I'm serious. I can teach you. Um, in addition to that, we're also going to introduce you to some key calculations that involve the future value formula and the rule of 70. But first, quick review. In the last lesson, we introduced T-charts. And in T-charts, we are going to have maybe income and expenditures, or more often, we would probably do assets and liabilities. And we know that everybody who's taking economics has the idea and goal that someday they want to make sure that they have millions in the bank. Um, we can do some calculations that make this actually seem a little bit easier than you might guess. But before we do that, let's just talk a little bit about the stock market. So when you start your first job, it might be tempting to spend all of your money on, a fancy apartment and a new car and stuff like that. But I would advise you to start putting some money into stocks and bonds. Because when it comes to investment like this, time is your friend. It's hard to make a lot of money fast, but given enough time, you're all capable of making a lot of money in the end. When it comes to something like a stock, that is ownership in a company. And if you were to own a stock in a company and that company were successful, that company pays its profits out to the stockholders. So if you bought, stock in company XYZ and XYZ had $1 million worth of profits this year, and there were 1 million different stockholders, then every stockholder would get $1 paid to them as a dividend. Based on what we believe to be the value of a company, stocks will follow the same rules as other products when it comes to supply and demand. So if we have quantity of a stock, this is for a stock in a particular company, and price in dollars. We've got the supply curve, we've got our demand curve. If people believe that a company is going to be profitable, then the demand curve will shift to the right, and the stock will start selling for more money on the stock exchange. Or if people believe that a company is struggling and will not post a profit, then it loses value and it ends up with a lower price on the stock exchange. So knowing this information, I always have students who believe it's possible. If they are really attentive to the markets, if they pay a lot of attention to the different companies, if they read their headlines every night, they believe they'll be able to figure out which stocks are going to be the winning stocks, and they'll be able to pick a winner and make a lot of money fast. That's probably not going to happen for any of you. Because to do that, you would be competing with some of the most powerful companies in the world. And if you were to look at a powerful company on Wall Street, a company like Goldman Sachs, Goldman can make a lot of money buying and selling stocks quickly. They can take part in what we call day trading, buying a stock and holding it for a day or less than a day, maybe just hours or maybe just minutes. But they buy it before anybody else realizes it's going to gain value, and then they sell it as everybody else comes to that realization. But Goldman is able to succeed because they currently employ 39,000 researchers and financial gurus and physicists who use all kinds of complicated mathematical formulas to predict the future. They employ people who used to work for important companies, and they still have contacts in those companies. And they still go out to dinner with their contacts in those companies, and then they make trades based on that information, which literally is somewhere in a shade of gray when it comes to the legality of that, because that is borderline insider trading. You can't trade on information that's not available to the rest of the public. But Goldman does it on a regular basis because they've got contacts in a lot of important companies. So Goldman has these 39,000 employees. A lot of them work in the tower. They've got this giant skyscraper right next to the New York Stock Exchange, but they also have researchers spread out all over the planet. And they're keeping track of all the important companies. They're keeping track of the CEOs, what's going on in those CEOs' personal lives. They're tracking, product development. They are keeping track of weather patterns. They are seriously keeping track of millions of different variables, and you as an individual cannot compete with them. Just so you know how Goldman actually makes money, this is kind of fun and interesting, I think. They start off the day with a team on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, and their team might have like $100 million to play with. And when the bell rings at 9 a.m. to open up trading for the day, they might have already gotten a call from the tower saying, we expect Apple to make a positive announcement at 10 o'clock today. And they know this because they have contacts in Apple and they have researchers who study Apple, and they know that Apple has said that they're going to have a press conference at 10 o'clock in the morning, and they've come to the conclusion that it's going to be good news of some sort. And so at like 9:01 in the morning, they take the $100 million and they transfer all of it into Apple stock. They do that before anyone else realizes that Apple's about to become a hot stock. And a few minutes after they do that, other companies might have seen them making that decision, and they might just copy Goldman, assuming that Goldman knows something that they don't. Or other companies might have come to the same conclusion on their own. The closer they get to 10 o'clock and that announcement from Apple, probably the more other companies are buying huge quantities of Apple stock. And as they do that, that gives us the demand shift to the right for Apple stock that would reflect the belief that it's going to gain in value. Probably Goldman doesn't even hold that stock until the announcement's made at 10 o'clock. The money that can be made off of that information is probably old information by the time the announcement is even made by Apple. So even before we get to 10 o'clock, maybe by 9:30, they sell the Apple stock and they go back to US dollars. And at that point, they might have made $10 million. And so there they are at $110 million. But Goldman does stuff like this all day long with different companies. They do it with information about even weather patterns, I was saying. If they were to find out from their researcher who lives in Indonesia that the tropical storm there is worse than anybody realized, and it was destroying the local rice crop, then they would probably buy futures in rice because they would know that rice prices are going to go up. Even bad news is still good news if it's information that you know before anyone else could possibly know it. Anyway, by the time you get home from work that day and you see in the news that Apple had a really good day and their stock is gaining value because of this positive announcement, by the time you hear that, you are literally hours behind all of the companies that are using this information to make money. If you bought and sold stock regularly, you might get lucky and you might just pick a stock that nobody knows is going to be hot, but your odds of doing that are pretty slim. They're slim enough that I would argue you are far better off learning how to play blackjack and just going to Vegas. If you want to make money fast, you have better odds playing blackjack in Vegas than you do picking a hot stock. So anyway, back to your T-chart and how you all become a millionaire. We're going to get to some calculations here in a second. But let's say that when you start your first career and you're relatively young, you start putting money into an account called a 401k. This is a tax-free account, or at least it's tax-free for now. You put money into it when you're young. When you're old, you eventually take money back out of it. But when you're putting money into it, you don't pay any taxes on it at the time. So it's a way to take your salary and invest it tax-free. And so let's say that when you are young, you start putting in less than $200 a month. Even if it's your first job, I bet you could, if you're careful, put $200 a month into your 401k. But let's say that you put in your first year of work, let's say you put in $2,000 into your retirement account, into your 401k. Let's do a calculation to see what $2,000 would be worth by the time you go to retire. The future value formula, let's do it here. The future value formula, that's not multiplication, that's future value. That's one variable. The future value formula is equal to the initial value times 1 plus the interest rate. We use R for the interest rate because it's a reminder that that is the rental cost for borrowing money. But 1 plus R in decimal form to the power of, I'm going to put in N here, where N is the number of years that that money is sitting in your account. And so the future value of $2,000 would be 2,000 times 1 plus the interest rate. And for the interest rate, if we look at historical trends, take any long period of time, and the typical trend in the stock market, if you were to invest broadly, not in a single company, but if you were investing in your 401k, your money might be spread out over thousands of different companies. There's safety in that. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. But take a broad collection of companies and any significant period of time, and you're looking at about 10% interest on average. So this would be 1 plus 0.1 to the number of years. And let's say that you start saving in your 20s and you retire in your 50s. So let's put in a 35 here as your exponent. That exponent really matters. The bigger that number is, the more this value is going to change. And so it's important to start saving when you're young. But here, 2,000 times 1 plus 0.1 to the 35th power, if I've done this correctly, comes out to a little over $56,000. And you might be thinking to yourself, $56,000 is not enough to retire on. That is not the $1 million that I want in my 401k as an asset. But $56,000 is coming from just 1 year's initial deposit. That's just the 2,000 that you put in the very first year you start working. So imagine if you do that again the second year that you work, and the third year that you work, and the fourth year that you work. That will begin to accumulate into a significant sum. Or you can think of it this way. If you put 2,000 in your first year of working, and 35 years later, you could withdraw the 56,000, which is enough to live on, it would seem. And then in the second year, if you had another 2,000 in the second year, then in your second year of retirement, you'd have another 56,000. And if you did this again in your third year, you'd have another 56,000 in your third year of retirement. And so it could go for all 35 years that you might be working. Let's do a couple other calculations though. Let's take this same calculation, but let's imagine that you didn't start saving when you were young. Let's imagine that you had this idea that you had to pay off your student loans first. And so instead of investing in your 20s, you wait and you start investing when you're in your mid 30s or something like that. If we just take this to the 20th power, so you save for 20 years instead of 35 years because you wait a little while. If we do this one, this calculation comes out to a tiny, tiny sum. This comes out to just over $13,000. So if you wanted to have, $50,000 for every year of retirement, and you waited until you were middle-aged, you would need to be putting in significantly more than $2,000 per year. And you could redo this problem to figure out how much you need to put in, but it's significantly more. This is the biggest mistake people make when it comes to saving for retirement. It's not that you need to put a ton of money in. $2,000 is not a lot of money. The important thing is that you put it in with enough years to allow that exponent to really work for you. That exponent is so important that Albert Einstein once said that compound interest is the greatest invention of mankind. Let's do a couple other calculations with this. If you put $2,000 into your 401k, that calculation is actually not quite right, because if you put in $2,000, your employer will actually match it. So if you put in $2,000, which somebody should probably be able to do even in their first year in their career, that means that you're actually dealing with $4,000. Oh, this problem is going to be much nicer, right? Let's do this one more time. Taking the $2,000 from your deposits, along with the $2,000 matching from your employer, $4,000 times 1.1 to the 35th power gives us a beautiful number. You're at over $112,000. And if you did that every single year that you worked for 35 years, then you would have that much that you could spend in every single year of retirement for 35 years straight. And if you spent less than that, of course, it would continue to just snowball for you. These calculations we've done so far, though, are a little bit misleading because we've been dealing with nominal values. Nominal, as you know, is just the raw number. And so, 56,000 sounds decent, 112,000 sounds even better. But that 112,000, when we're talking about, a date 40 years from now, that $112,000 isn't going to have the same purchasing power that $112,000 has right now. So if we were to do this problem more honestly, let's do it like this. The future value of, let's get back to your $4,000 times 1, and let's do it as 0.07. In the stock market, we see about 10% interest over long periods of time as an annual average, but we also see 3% inflation. And so the real return would be equal to the nominal minus inflation. That real always denotes that we're talking about a number that is adjusted for inflation. So by adjusting it for 3% inflation instead of 1.1, we're talking about 1.07 to the 35th power. And in this case, then our inflation adjusted value comes out to, we're down to 42,706. But that is adjusted for inflation. And after working for 35 years, if all has gone well and you've paid off your house and stuff like that, then 42,000 in real value is probably plenty of money to live on. But of course, you could always increase this value if you want to live in absolute luxury in retirement and not just continue what looks like a middle-class existence as an old person. Let's do one more calculation. If you are looking at financial firms, there will probably be a financial firm that is assigned to your company and they manage everyone's 401k. And if you meet with your financial advisor, they're probably going to tell you that their firm charges you just like 1% interest or something like that. And when they say, oh, we only charge 1% interest, you'll think to yourself, oh yeah, 1%, that's nothing, that's fine. But when we subtract another percent from your return, because they've basically taken a percentage of your return, then this problem, 4,000 times 1.06 to the 35th power, is going to come out to just over $30,000. When we compare that to the 42,000 you would have had at 7%, we can see that that would be a $12,000 charge for you. My advice is when you're dealing with a financial advisor, they might have a mutual fund, and a mutual fund is an actively managed fund, and they'll probably charge you 1 or 2% to use that mutual fund. But you can actually probably just use an index fund instead. An index fund isn't actively managed, and as a result, usually the service fee for it is much lower. It's usually less than 1%. And an index fund still spreads your money far and wide. It's not actively managed, but in the long run, it's probably not going to matter. For the calculations we've just been doing, I want to put in a key reminder. And that is that all the calculations I just showed you made the assumption that we're going to see a 10% return in the stock market over long periods of time. I cannot guarantee that that's going to happen in the future. That is what historically we have seen in the past, but I don't know for sure what the future of the stock market looks like. And so your actual return can be very different from the calculations I've just shown you. because we're basing it on that assumption of a 10% nominal return. Let's do one more calculation here and then we'll call it a day. We can work backwards using the future value formula. Let's imagine that you really wanted to get to that $1 million. You wanted to be a millionaire. If we were solving for $1 million and we needed to know what the present value needed to be, we could take 1 million is equal to the present value times 1.1 to the 35th power. And so this is just a nominal value. If we were to solve then for present value, or the initial value, if you're talking about saving in the stock market for 35 years, you would need a present value of about 35,000. That sounds like a lot to me, but that would be a one-time deposit. If you were to, for example, inherit some money and you had a few tens of thousands of dollars when you're young, if you put that into a retirement account, you would be looking at $1 million in retirement based on the assumption of a 10% return. Or you can definitely get to $1 million if you look at smaller contributions over and over again throughout your career. This was a brief introduction to future value. Oh my gosh, we're supposed to do a rule of 72. Okay, hang on for 5 more minutes here. We can do a problem with rule of 70 real quick. The rule of 70 is weird math. I don't know why this works, but the rule of 70 states that something doubles, a variable doubles every 70 over X years, where X is your rate of growth. So if, for example, you had a tree in your yard and the tree was growing at 3% per year, if the tree grows 3% per year, 70 over 3 is equal to 23.3. And so if you have a tree growing at 3% per year, and then it doubles in size every 23 1/3 years. This math doesn't make any sense to me because we're leaving the 3 not in decimal form. That's 3 as in 3%. We're not going to write it as 0.03, just 3. I've talked with math teachers about why this math works, and it's a bit of a mystery. I don't know why it does. But we can use the rule of 70 to make a quick calculation. And it's not perfect. It's more of an estimate. It's an estimate that can help you make a quick calculation about the future value of money, or the future value of prices. If you're talking about like 3% inflation every year, we should expect prices to double every 23 1/3 years as well. Let's go back to our initial future value problem where we were looking at $2,000 times 1.1 to the 35th power. And that came out to just over $56,000. If we were to map this out using the rule of 70, this is 70 over 10 for 10%. And so we're looking at everything doubling every 7 years. So in year 0, we're at $2,000. This is year and our money. In year 7, we're at 4,000. In year 14, we're at 8,000. At 21, we're at 16,000. At 28, we are at 32,000. And at year 35, we're at 64,000. So 64,000 does not equal 56,000. These two calculations varied a little bit. But in general, we can say that this is a quick estimate to say, like, yeah, it'd be around 60,000, something like that. If we were to say it's around 60,000, we're not off by that much. I actually heard that the rule of 72 is more accurate. So 72 divided by whatever it would be. But that makes for messier math. A lot of times on the AP test, they give us nice numbers like 10% or 7%, things that are very easy to do calculations with. That wraps it up. This is part 2 of T-charts and personal finance. We got one more day of T-charts to do, and this is where it's going to get to the important aspect of banking and monetary policy. So come back and tune in for one more day of T-charts. I'll see you all on here then.